Everyone has their own tales about the strange and bizarre. My story is about how my half-whole mask saved my life and continues to save my life to this very day. Late in December, I was traveling north from California to my home state of Oregon. Nothing fancy. I was just going to visit the family for the holidays. On my way north, though, I hit a small snowstorm. It wasn't too terrible, just a lot of snow falling all at once. I wasn't particularly worried about a small increase of snow at first, considering I had just had snow tires installed before my long journey home. I did, however, start to get a little hesitant to drive when the snow really started coming down. The large amount falling, coupled with the large amount already littering the ground as I traveled higher into the mountains, caused me to reconsider finding a place to stay for the night. I figured I could get some sleep while the storm passed over. That, and the fact that I could give my car's heater a break before it decided to burst into flames, or even worse, just stop working altogether. I scanned as much of the immediate landscape as I could, but it seemed there were no buildings in the immediate area. The only other option I had for my predicament was to keep on driving and hope there would be a town or exit nearby that I could take in order to escape from the storm. I must have been driving for at least an hour before I finally saw a sign up ahead indicating how far the closest city was. My heart sank a little when I read 162 miles as it flew by my windshield and vanished into the snowy night. At this point, the snow was really beating down, and I knew I wasn't going to last 162 minutes, let alone 162 miles. The digital clock on my radio read 1:21 a.m., and I decided that the next turnoff I saw I would take, and hoped that I could find a neighborhood that would produce some results on my current endeavor. My thought process was either I'm gonna freeze to death in my car, or stay the night at some random person's house. Weighing the two options in my head, I picked the only thing a sane person would pick, and went with finding a random house. After about 30 minutes flew by, though, I was still having no luck finding a place to pull off. Just when I was starting to lose all hope, I suddenly spotted a small turnoff in the distance. The small shape started to make its way closer into my headlights, and on further inspection, it revealed to me that it was two wooden poles that possibly belonged to a fence. When I turned onto the road between the two wooden poles, the ground beneath me felt rocky and rough, like I was traveling on gravel. I didn't drive for too long before I started to see a small cabin creeping into my field of view. I could see from the distance that the lights in the cabin were all off, but the place seemed to be in very good shape. I parked my car under a tall, wild-looking tree that took residence in the cabin's front lawn. Hopping out of my car, I immediately grabbed my extra jacket and put it on, pulling the half-whole mask I wore around my neck up and over my ears to keep the heat around my face. I put my cap on and trudged up to the cabin after pulling my cap snug on my head. As I traveled through the cold, windy night up to what I felt was my salvation, I immediately regretted not having any gloves for my hands. Despite the irritation I had with my hands, my face and the rest of my body were comfortably warm, so I guess I didn't really have much room to complain. I stuffed my frozen hands deep into my pockets and continued my journey across the cabin's lawn. As I made my way to the door, though, I noticed something a bit odd. There was no indication of life anywhere. There wasn't even a car out in the front yard. Taking my right hand out of my pocket, I knocked 3 times, waiting patiently before calling out. "Hello? Is anyone there? I'm sorry to bother you so late at night, but I need a place to stay for a few hours if you don't mind." Nothing answered my plea for help, so I knocked 3 more times on the door, hitting my knuckles harder against the aged wood of the entrance. "Hello?" I said again, a little louder before continuing with, "I'm not here to rob you or anything. I just need a place to stay for the rest of the night. I promise I'll be gone by sunrise." As I finished my sentence, I touched the ornate metal door handle. Noticing that the door seemed to be unlocked, I called out in a loud voice once again. "I'm gonna come in now, so if there's anybody in there, please let me know now, please." I pressed the metal lever down, finding it a bit odd that the door was left unlocked. I opened the door with little resistance on the other end, closing it behind me with the same resistance, despite the fact that the door looked extremely old. Looking around the area, I noticed the cabin had 5 rooms. The living room, which was the biggest room, a small kitchen, an even smaller washroom, and what I assumed were 2 small bedrooms in the back. No lights were on inside the cozy cabin, making it almost pitch dark if my eyes weren't already adjusted to the darkness outside. I decided the best thing to do would be to search for a light switch, so I took out my phone and turned on my flashlight app to scan the walls. My scan produced no results, however, and at the risk of losing precious battery power on my phone, I decided the best option would be to turn off the light and put my phone on airplane mode. Before turning it off, I studied the paintings hanging on the wall that I had glossed over in the initial scan. Each painting that crossed my sights were just typical landscapes or harbors, and things like that. There was a painting that looked like a fox hunt or something, but other than that, it was plenty of typical paintings you would see hanging on the walls around an elderly person's home. There was one painting, however, that caught my attention. The painting was very small, and consisted of what looked like 2 adults, a mother and a father, a teenage girl, and a small child. The family captured in that painting were wearing what looked to be Victorian-era clothing. I'm only guessing about the clothes. I mean, they could have been from the 1800s or the early 20th century. I'm not exactly an expert. The point is, they looked very ornate and regal. There was something really disturbing about the image in this painting, though. The faces of each family member looked like they had been smoothed over with clay. It's a bit difficult to describe, but the 3 family members looked like they had no facial features. By no facial features, I mean instead of the normal facial features you and I have, the 3 people in the painting had grooves of smooth flesh, where you'd normally have an eye, nose, or mouth. The only person that didn't possess this strange anomaly was the teenage girl, who had normal facial features for a teenager. In fact, I might say she was quite breathtaking. I pulled myself away from the painting to take a glance at my phone for the time. My phone indicated that it was past 2 a.m. in the morning, so I decided to go to the back room and check to see if it was occupied. To my relief, the room was vacant besides a medium-sized bed, ornate dresser, and a nightstand. The walls were blank beside more sappy paintings, to give it a little more atmosphere, I guess. Although there was no indication of a heating system, besides a chimney, the rooms were bearable enough that I figured I could just bundle up in my clothes under the covers in order to stay warm for the night. I was only going to be there for a few hours anyway, so there wasn't much point in starting a fire. Plus, the people who owned the cabin wouldn't be back tonight, considering how late it was. I hopped into the worn-out bed facing the open door, next to another door I assumed was a closet. I pulled my half-whole mask completely up and over my face to make sure my head would stay nice and warm the rest of my stay. Pulling the fabric of my mask down slightly, I set the alarm on my phone for 4:30 a.m. and put it back down on the nightstand. I covered my face again and bundled up tightly with the sheets, closing my eyes and letting dreamland take me away. I woke up after what felt like minutes later, though, to the sound of scratching. My body froze as I heard the noise over and over again, coming softly from the closed door. I tried to relax myself by thinking that all the noise I had heard was just a rat or some other animal that was spending the night in the closet while the cabin's owners were away. Quietly, I shifted onto my back, pulling my half-whole mask down slightly, so a little slit appeared, giving me a small window to look at what was out there. I laid on the bed stiff as a board, with my cap and mask covering my face in such a way that it acted like a visor, giving me a small peek into what was in the darkness. Thankfully, my eyes were still adjusted to the dark, which gave me a small amount of reassurance as I continued looking in the direction the scratching noise was coming from. The scratching continued louder and longer for what seemed like minutes, until just like that, it suddenly stopped. Silence filled the room once again, but it wasn't a safe kind of silence. The deafening silence in the room was a foreboding, ominous sort. The vacuum of sound in the air was the type of silence that happens in a movie just before something jumps out at you. Just when I began to calm myself down, the doorknob to the closet began to jiggle and turn very slowly. My heart was racing out of my chest as I saw and heard that knob turn, and every inch of my body wanted to bolt out of that bed and out of that cabin before whatever was on the other side of that door got out after me. I laid perfectly still on the bed, despite the fact that I had a cocktail of adrenaline, nerves, and instincts telling me to get the hell out of there. My eyes widened as the door to the closet opened slightly. I saw what looked like a dried head attached to an elongated neck pop out of the opening, followed by a skeletal body. The thing that was emerging from the closet crawled on all fours out of the doorway and slowly made its way to the bed I was sleeping in. I had never been more frightened in my whole entire life as the thing stood up, almost touching the roof of the cabin, and looked down in my direction. The creature stood there, studying me, as I peeked through the thin slit in my mask, pure terror swirling around in my mind as I glanced up at the body of the creature. Looking at the creature's skeletal face, I noticed that it had no eyes in its eye sockets, which led me to believe that it couldn't see me, even though I could see it. Just when the idea of it not being able to see started to give me a little comfort, the creature began to speak.
"Strange,"
the creature whispered softly as it continued to watch me. Then it began to speak again.
"It has no fear of me,"
the creature continued to say in a hoarse tone as it began to breathe loudly, continuing to look at me and gripping down on the edge of the bed. Feeling the creature's bony hand touch the edge of my bed caused my brain to go into complete panic mode. The only thing that stopped me from jumping up was the thought that maybe the creature believed I was dead or asleep and wouldn't attack.
"How can it not fear? How can it not fear me?"
the thing said through clenched teeth before loudly gasping, suddenly pulling back with its mouth open in an expression that seemed like fear.
"It has no face,"
the thing whispered to itself as it continued to back away.
"It has no face,"
the creature said again, but this time louder than before and slightly more threatening.
"It has no face,"
the creature shouted as it backed off further away from the bed. I heard the thing breathing loudly and quickly before calming down and slowly returning to the side of the bed. Leaning over me slowly, the creature continued to look at me before softly beginning to breathe on my face. I could smell its foul breath even through my mask. The smell was so powerful, it took all my strength not to gag as a reflex to the awful stench. In my mind, I made the choice to keep motionless and not do or say anything that could compromise whatever illusion I was giving the thing that was currently studying me. The creature breathed softly on me again. The stench I smelled from its breath could only be described as pure death.
"Strange,"
the thing whispered at me again, leaning in close to the point I could see and smell its flesh. It reached for me, its hand slowly moving towards my face. With every inch that decaying hand moved, I couldn't help but feel my situation becoming more and more dire. I thought this was it for me. The creature would kill me, or take me away and torture me. No one would ever know what had happened. No one would ever find my body out here. No one would know my story. I could feel tears start to swell up in my eyes as I thought of everyone I ever loved being yanked away from me in this one moment.
"No face, no face, no face,"
the creature softly chanted as its hands crept ever closer to my face. I could hear anguish in the creature's voice as it continued chanting. As its bony hand crept only centimeters away, I braced myself for the worst, making my last thoughts I would ever have about the people who I loved. Just as I thought it would be over, though, a sudden loud noise erupted from the room, filling the ear closest to the nightstand with a flood of beeps and causing the creature to scream and jump back. As the noise continued, the creature threw itself back against the wall, shrieking uncontrollably in terror as it stumbled back towards the closet. I was dumbstruck for a second before the thought came to me that I had set my alarm for 4:30, which must have been the source of the noise. I jumped out of the bed, grabbing my phone and pointing the lit-up screen at the monster as the alarm continued to ring loudly. The loud ringing caused the monster to shriek even more in confusion and terror as it retreated quicker than I approached. Seeing my chance, I activated the flashlight and put it on strobe in order to disorient the monster further.
No face, no face, no face!
The creature shrieked at me as it withdrew to the safety of the closet. I continued to shine my light on the creature, and for added effect, I started playing loud music and sounds as I jabbed my phone in the monster's direction like a lion tamer. The thing threw itself into the dark recesses of the closet, and I shoved the door back, locking it in place after I slammed it closed. The shrieks coming from the monster started to get fainter and fainter, like it was retreating deeper into the house.
It has no face!
I could hear the creature yelling out as it got further and further away. After hearing the last retreating words of the thing that terrified me the whole night, I bolted from the cabin at breakneck speed, jumping into my car, and floored it down the gravel road. I was shaking all over as I drove, and when I pulled my half-whole mask further down, my exposed skin was as white as the snow that littered the ground. I was so frightened by the whole experience, as soon as I pulled into the first town I saw, I parked my car and began to sob uncontrollably for a while. The experience that I had just been through would scar me for life, but as I wept in my car in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, I couldn't help but start to laugh a little in between my fits of crying. Somehow, I had made it through my ordeal without so much as a scratch on me. Well, besides the mental scars. I was fine, I was alive, and I didn't have to worry anymore. After I finished with my whole episode of crying and laughing like an insane person, I entered the store sniffing and wiping away the rest of my tears. As I continued into the store, the cashier looked up to me and traced my direction with his eyes before continuing with what he was doing. The store was mostly empty besides an elderly couple. I was the only customer in right now. "Had a rough night?" the cashier said with one eyebrow cocked up while he scanned my items. "You have no idea. I noticed you looked a bit upset when you came in. What happened? You get dumped or something?" He looked up at me curiously as the register computed how much I owed him. Looking at the young man, he seemed to be a little younger than I was, although that doesn't say much, because even though I'm 22, I look younger than my actual age. I looked at the cashier's name tag for a second, before feeling I had nothing to lose by telling him about what had just happened. The small name on his ID tag read Evan, and as I finished telling him my frightening tale, something odd happened. I expected him to burst out laughing, or say I was the best liar he had ever talked to, but instead of doing any of that, Evan just stood there, his skin milk white. As he stared at me with an expression so horrified, he gave me the impression that he had just witnessed someone getting run over by a train or something. Evan, are you alright?" "What?" "Oh, yeah, it's just, Evan began to talk before his thoughts trailed off, due to the new feeling that we were both suddenly being watched. I began to feel eyes burning into the back of my head, before turning around to see the old couple I'd glanced at when I entered the store beforehand. They possessed the same terrified look that Evan had had just a few seconds ago. They must have overheard the whole story while I told it. After a few moments of silence, the couple asked me what I knew about the cabin. I couldn't really say much. I gave them the best description I could about what I had seen. They proceeded to tell me that the cabin had been there for quite a long time, and that it was haunted by a presence so terrifying the place had been condemned and left to rot away after so many people had disappeared there. They told me that no one who ever stayed in that cabin had ever been seen alive again, if they'd ever been seen at all after their visit. "One of my best friends stayed the night in that cabin," Evan said quietly as he stared off into the distance. "I refused to go in. I knew something bad would happen if we went. I tried so hard to convince him that the dare was stupid and to not go in, but he refused to be labeled as a chicken," and he continued. "I never saw him again after that night. I kept going by his house, but his parents couldn't find him either. We put out flyers and billboards, but we never had any luck. After a few days, we contacted the police and I told them about the cabin. Evan began to choke down tears as he clenched his fist. They found him in the basement of that cabin, sprawled out on the floor. His eyes were removed from his eye sockets. His nose, his lips, they were sliced off. When they found him, he was naked with an incision from the bottom of his ribcage to his pelvis, down the middle of his body. All of his internal organs were removed, and to add insult to injury, his genitals were sliced off as well. He was put in Victorian-era clothing, and there were 3 other bodies in a similar state to him. But you want to know the worst part of it all? When the police did an autopsy, they found he was alive during the whole process. They never found who did it. There was no DNA evidence to convict everybody. They didn't even find the tools that made the incisions. They couldn't find anything. Evan clenched his fist tighter on the table, before the old man listening to our conversation put his hand on his shoulder to reassure him everything would be all right. As he comforted Evan, he looked at me. People have been disappearing from that area for decades, you know, maybe even centuries for all we know, but the bodies always end up the same way. I don't care who you are. No one deserves something like that happening to him. I wish they would torch that evil place to the ground. The old lady joined her husband's side and looked at me with the most foreboding face I had ever seen. If your story is true, you should consider yourself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. In all my years of living, you're the only one I've seen go into that cabin and come back. After hearing the old woman's words, I realized that Evan had said the body of his friend was found in the basement, which explains why the monster's voice got fainter. It would have pulled me into the basement if my phone hadn't gone off. I quickly paid for my items and left the store more troubled now than I had been when I had entered. Feeling drowsy due to the lack of sleep and constant adrenaline rush caused by my horrible ordeal, I decided to go to a hotel and spend the day sleeping and relaxing to get my mind off things. That night, as I sat on the bed in my hotel room, I looked at the 2 items that have saved my life. In one hand, I gripped onto my half-hole mask, which had hid my face from that terrible monster. In my other, I held my cell phone, which had scared away the beast that could have killed me. I decided from that day on I would always wear my mask to bed. It saved my life, so that's the least I could do for it. The recent brush with death I had just experienced taught me that life was too precious to waste, so I decided to ask my best friend Samantha out on a date, and turned out things worked perfectly. Samantha and I were together for 2 years before I recently asked for her hand in marriage, which she said yes to. And part of me will never forget that awful night. Because of it, not only have I been wearing my half-hole mask to bed every night since, I've also made it a priority not to live in any type of house that has a basement. As an added safety measure as well, I started locking every door before going to bed. It's a bit of a pain, but you can never be too careful. Despite these crazy precautions, Samantha has accepted my little quirks and has continued to be supportive as we continue our journey through life together. I couldn't be happier with the way things turned out in my life, and I'm so lucky to be with Samantha. Everything's going perfectly. There's just one thing that bothers me. I think I might just have to blame my imagination, but sometimes when I wake up at night, when it's really quiet, sometimes I'll hear soft scratching noises. Also, and I think it's just my paranoia, but sometimes I swear I hear something whisper,
"No face. It has no face,"
from inside my closet. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. As always, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any criticisms on how I can make the videos better, or any thoughts about it in general, please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. As well, in the description below the video, there will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, Twitter, and Twitch accounts. If you guys want to chat, please be sure to send me a message on any of those. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Please be forewarned, though, that I tend to go on Facebook less than the others, so it may take me a little bit longer to respond to you. If you want to send in a story, or you have a story that you'd like to be read, then please be sure to take a look at the description and send me a message on any one of those sites. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include the name of the story if it has one, the theme of the story if it has one as well, and how you would like to be credited in the video the story appears in, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. And please be sure to include as much detail as you are comfortable with, and make sure to follow proper grammar at least a little bit. That way it will be easier for me to read, and it will also be long enough to put into a video. If you guys are curious about the music used in the video, it's always listed in the description in the order which it appears, and I have links to the artists as well. I usually use Doblato Studios and Miyuji, so that's usually what you're going to find there. If you're curious about the art in the video, my art guy Alan always does all of my art for the channel. He's a very good friend of mine, and I have links to all of his social media as well, so if you like his stuff, be sure to check him out. He does commissions as well, I'm pretty sure, so if you like it, you can definitely get some good quality products from him. I don't think there's too much new updates today, other than the fact that I'm very excited for the PlayStation 5 coming out, and I just ordered Pikmin 3 on the Switch, so hopefully that gets here soon. I've been waiting like 3 years for that because nobody bought a Wii U. So yeah, that's my news for now. Be sure to let me know how you guys are doing as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.